Shit We've Read is a proud member of Bilo Network, a network of geeky podcasts.
Please visit shitwe'veread.com to support the show.
Now let's talk about some books.
Hello, and welcome back to Shit We've Read, a fantasy and sci-fi podcast hosted by some geeky friends. I am your host, Laura Benson. Tonight we are going to discuss the book Immortal Dark, written by Tigest Girma. I am joined by my two co-hosts. Let's introduce Bella Romero first. Hello.
Hi, Laura.
I'm glad that you are joining us for this and every episode.
Me too. It's also really exciting that it's Black History Month.
Yes.
Well, by the time this comes out, I think Black History Month will be almost over, but Black History is every day. But wanted to make sure that, we shut that out in the podcast.
Yeah.
Excited to be here.
Yeah. And then our other co-host, Jason Rico.
Hi both of you. How's it going?
All right.
Cool.
Wow. Never mind. I was going to bully him. I was like, no, I can't. I can't cancel Emma on my episode and cancel Rico this episode. It's just too much.
It's also the month of Valentine's Day, so you got to show me the love, not the hate.
That is very true.
Valentine's Day is love for capitalism and overconsumption. So
you're not wrong.
Yeah.
We say as we discuss books, which are blowing up on TikTok as one of the largest, dumbest things to overconsume, because you only need one copy of a book. But anyways, that is Emma Sky's rant you should watch on TikTok. Heaven forbid you read a book. Laura, kick us off. I'm going on too many rants.
Well, before we jump into our discussion, we always talk about the other shit we're reading right now. Since I introduced Bella first, let me jump to Jason. What are you reading?
Okay. Prior to this book, because it is Black History Month, as Bella mentioned, I do try to go out of my way to consume, not necessarily books I don't normally consume, but make it a point to consume books from voices that, are really important. And so I finished an anthology of short stories. It's called Black Stars, A Galaxy of New Worlds. It's 6 stories by some of today's most influential Black authors, and they all explore futures set in a variety of locations, from an alley in New York to an interstellar wormhole. So
all your favorite things.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it definitely, runs the gamut of locations and kind of stories. Some are way more sci-fi than others. So it's just, it's a good... I like anthologies because they're a great introduction to a lot of authors I don't normally
just thinking
read.
The same thing. Yeah.
And also a good range of stories, quickly, you just get in and get out. And
I always recommend anthologies to people who are like, I haven't been reading for a while. I don't really know what I like. And I'm like, try a bunch of anthologies, see who really sticks, see what kind of genres you like, and then come back to me, because it gives you a whole run of the gamut of whatever the theme is. So cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. I might have to look into that. It sounds very interesting. Well, what about you, Bella? What are you reading?
I'm actually still reading All Things Wicked. I'm still on A Lion Among Men. I think that's what I talked about in our last, what was it?
Out of the Drowning Deep.
Out of the Drowning Deep. I was going to say The Immortal Dark. And I was like, that's not it. That's what we're currently talking about. But anyways, so A Lion Among Men by Gregory Maguire. It's the 3rd book in the Wicked series. And then almost done with Project Hail Mary. We're on chapter 24 of 30. So we have about 3 hours left in the audiobook.
The home stretch.
Yeah, I had so many thoughts that I would love to share, but very spoilery. So I'll just have to read that book to see why I was so fired up for a hot minute. And it's definitely it's still very science-y. But it definitely isn't running the story as much, and it's much more sci-fi science, if you will, because they're kind of learning as they go. And I will just keep it at that.
It's really hard to talk about that book without spoilers.
Especially because the movie's coming out very soon. If there wasn't a movie, maybe I wouldn't care, but it's got Ryan Gosling, so people are going to tune in. So
yeah, fair enough.
Good point. Well, I'm excited to hear your complete thoughts.
Happy to share
when you finish it.
So what are you reading, Laura?
I mentioned this in our last episode. I am still reading The Bones Beneath My Skin by T.J. Klune. It was an arc, and so it's taking me a little bit longer to read because it's a physical book, and so for some reason they take longer for me to read compared to an ebook. But I really like it. At first, it was a little hard for me to get into. It's basically about this man who goes to live in his parents' cabin. He inherited this cabin, but he finds this man and his 10-year-old daughter there, kind of squatting. And so he kind of gets wrapped up into what's going on with them. They're basically in hiding and on the run. But the little girl is very special. And so at first I didn't really like the main character. He was kind of annoying and like rude and mean. But then as the story progressed and he kind of like found himself a little more intertwined with the other two characters, I got into it a little bit more and I liked the dynamics between them. It's really great so far. I want to say maybe have a quarter of the book left. So hopefully we'll have that done in the next week. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. And it's hard because I'm always trying to keep up with the books for us, for the podcast. And so I'm also reading a second book. And so I prioritize our books.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So it does take me a little bit longer to get through the other book that I'm reading. But at least it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
I appreciate the sacrifice you make. Like putting your books on the back burner.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Some of us aren't diligently planning our book schedules. And apparently can stick to them in spite of whatever happens in our lives. It's really quite a talent, Rico, that I'm begrudgingly complimenting you on. So.
I appreciate that.
I know it doesn't sound like it, but it's a compliment. I promise.
I know that pains you to do, so I really do appreciate it.
It's really hard to admit that you're better at reading than me sometimes, even though you read half the book. But
yeah, Jason gets through so many books.
It's crazy.
Half the book is still rounding up a full book, so that's just math.
Okay. Wow.
Anybody who's studied math at school knows that. You round up, you don't round up.
Okay. Now who's science? All right. Laura, get us through.
Yeah, let's jump into our book here. Okay, so we read Immortal Dark by Tigest Girma. It is a romantic dark academia fantasy. It was published September 3rd, 2024 by Little Brown and Company. Just a few content warnings. Parental abuse, blood drinking, death, gore, murder, sexual content, strong language, suicide ideation, and violence.
Just some light reading for Valentine's Day and Black History Month.
I mean, it sounds like a standard vampire book,
Do we have to say blood drinking as a content warning? It's a vampire book.
Rico, some people
don't know.
Okay,
some people have not read vampire books.
That's fair.
Okay.
Fair enough.
If you just read romantic dark academia fantasy, it might be a bit of a surprise.
Okay.
So anyone who hasn't read this book, be aware of these warnings. Take care of yourself. We may or may not discuss some of these in our spoiler segment, but just in case. All right, synopsis. I picked on, I think, Jason last time.
I had a feeling it'd be me. I'm ready. I'm mentally prepared. He did have to read the last one, so and he did very, very well.
I was holding my breath. Thank God I wasn't selected.
Okay, I'm ready. The Cruel Prince meets Ninth House in this dangerously romantic dark academia fantasy where a lost heiress must infiltrate an arcane society and live with the vampire she suspects killed her family and kidnapped her sister. It began long before my time, but something has always hunted our family. Orphaned heiress Kidan Adane grew up far from the arcane society she was born into, where human bloodlines gain power through vampire companionship. When her sister June disappears, Kidan is convinced a vampire stole her, the very vampire bound to their family, the cruel yet captivating Susenyos Sagad. To find June, Kidan must infiltrate the elite Uxley University, where students study to ensure peaceful coexistence between humans and vampires and inherit their family legacies. Kidan must survive living with Susenyos, even as he does everything he can to drive her away. It doesn't matter that Susenyos' wickedness speaks to Kidan's own violent nature and tempts her to surrender to a life of darkness. She must find her sister and kill Susenyos at all costs. When a murder mirroring June's disappearance shakes Uxley, Kidan sinks further into the ruthless underworld of vampires, risking her very soul. There she discovers a centuries-old threat, and June could be at the center of it. To save her sister, Kidan must bring Uxley to its knees and either break free from the horrors of her own actions or embrace the dark entanglements of love and the blood it requires.
Well done.
Thank you, Bella.
No problem.
All right, let's start off with the non-spoiler review, first impressions. What did you guys think of this book?
Rico first, Mr.
Okay, fair enough.
Self-proclaimed vampire expert.
Yeah, so this book has all the ingredients of something I'd love, right? Yeah. We got vampires. Mm-hmm. We have dark academia. We have magical houses, right? But it didn't all come together quite for me. I didn't love this book. But I will say something that I did enjoy.
Shock.
The author is Ethiopian, and I did really love how she combined her heritage with the traditional vampire lore to kind of give us a new type of vampire story. That was really kind of refreshing to read. I love that the entire cast of characters was black with, strong, like, black is sexy energy throughout the entire story. And so it was very fresh and unique in terms of all the other vampire books I've read. That said, I didn't love the book. I won't go into too much, but I was frustrated with a lot of the characters, a lot of the decisions that were being made, a lot of the thought processes, all the ingredients that were there just kind of added up to like a mush, like a messy. It didn't really ever come together into a cohesive story. There was like too many layers to the story that I felt could have easily been like trimmed down to make it tighter. So all in all, I am leaving feeling disappointed. Yeah, I'm not upset. I'm disappointed.
Okay,
vampire dad. All right.
What about you, Bella?
I agree with a lot of what Rico said, but I still really enjoyed myself. I feel like I've read a lot of different vampire books, and I'm sure Rico feels the same, although I've probably read more of the words than he does. So I I feel like I've read a lot of vampire stories, and they all feel very similar, and this felt so different that I really enjoyed the journey that we were on. Yeah, it's a little messy. It's a debut novel. It's also the first part in a trilogy. So there are 2 more books. So I think a lot of the messiness hopefully gets cleaned up in the next 2 books. Loved what he said about like sort of the history and lore woven into the story from the author's culture. Even in like the description of characters, it never once felt inauthentic to talk about the skin tone or the hair or the style. I think that oftentimes, and like no shade to any specific author or like racial group of authors, but sometimes including diverse casts of characters can feel tokenized or like checking a box. Like, okay, we've got everyone represented.
Yeah.
And this just felt so inherently like, okay, I know everyone is black and that's very obvious, but it isn't being shoved down my throat every 2 minutes. Like someone's not being described as like dark as night. Blech. Like there are just certain ways that have historically been that black characters have been described that this book does not do. And so I think that comes from having a black author, but I also think that this being a predominantly black story about African history melded with this sort of the author's British, so like it's not even Americanized in any way. I don't think. I think it's very like rooted in like English academic atmosphere and also culture. If you think about like we can all kind of describe the culture of Cambridge and Oxford without ever having been there because it's in our zeitgeist. But so it was really good. I felt like I was there. This is definitely a YA novel, but at times tried to be an adult novel, and it was confusing. we'll get into that. But there's like a lot of sexual tension in this book that I like was like, is this an After Dark book? At times I was like, my brain is so rotted from After Dark. This feels illegal to think. But also I could see it being a really good like adult novel or even another like After Dark sort of book. So somebody out there write the smut version of like dark academia vampires. I want it. I think Rico fully agrees with that. We'd feature you in a heartbeat. Add us on whatever social media still exists by the time this comes out. Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts. I really enjoyed the book. Definitely looking forward to the sequels. Wish I had bought the physical book, which I don't say a lot about books. I usually stick with ebooks. My co-host can tell you, like, my bookshelf is pretty selective in that, like, I collect Little Women, and then I have our ARC books that we get or authors that we've had sign books or have had on the podcast. Sometimes books that we read on the podcast if I love them enough, or for whatever reason, bought a physical book because I couldn't get a digital version. But yeah, I would buy the physical book of this. That's how much I liked it.
Nice.
Wish I had, probably will. Rico, you can give me yours.
Maybe. I don't think about it. We'll see. We'll talk later.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. Laura, what did you think?
I'm kind of on the fence because I listened to the audiobook for the entire thing. Normally I switch between the audiobook and physical or ebook. But it was all audiobook for this. And so I found myself having a lot of questions. And I didn't know if it was because I just missed something. And, you know, it's an audiobook. I can't necessarily just go back and find the information easy. And so I struggled throughout the book wondering if I was missing something, if I wasn't following something correctly. Am I misunderstanding some of these characters' motives and like the way that they said things, and so I struggled getting through it, and I didn't know if it's me or if it was the book. But similar to like what Jason said, I did like a lot of the lore, the bringing in the author bringing in her own roots, I guess, and it was different from what we're used to reading for vampire novels. So I did enjoy that aspect a lot. It was very interesting, the different take on how vampires are and the changes that were made to how they were able to coexist right now, and that kind of stuff was just fascinating to me. But I mean, again, I don't know if I liked it or not. I'm hoping our discussion will help me get there.
We'll sway you one way or the other.
Sometimes that's how it goes. So, okay. Yeah. Should we get into spoilers then?
Well, really quickly,
yes.
I just want to say, Bella, you mentioned that the author was British, and I just wanted to say that they are Ethiopian-born, but they are based out of Australia.
Sorry.
Australia.
Oh, Australia. Okay.
Yeah, so your point still stands. That there's no like Americanization of it, but just want to clarify that they're Australian.
Thank you.
Not British. Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, British? Interesting.
I couldn't remember, and we were talking about it before, and I thought one of you said British, so I was just stealing that. So thank you, Rico, for confirming. But yeah, it's definitely not American feeling in any way. So, which I always appreciate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into spoilers then. If any listeners do not want to know, pause and come back later. Or if you would like to continue, then by all means, let's get into it.
You've been warned.
I mean, I don't know where to start. I feel like there's just so many things that were happening in this book.
And that's why it was frustrating, because there was too many layers to this cake, right? And you could choose any 2 or 3 of these things and it'd be great. But you have human vampire politics, which is a great ingredient already. And then you have like ancient artifacts and then sentient houses with their own rules, which is cool too. You can build a whole book out of that. And then there's all these rules that come to when it comes to the vampires in terms of like the binds that are placed on them, and then like biting on different body parts and what that means.
The rules around biting.
Yeah,
period.
like that's exactly like who they can feed off of. And it's just like all those are different. We have an abduction mystery, a murder mystery, enemies to lovers, back to maybe enemies or partners or like that line's kind of muddled.
Yeah.
And then if that wasn't enough, the main male character who's a vampire, oh, by the way, he's also royalty. So there's so many things that were in this book that like I was overwhelmed. And the first half of the book just felt like an info dump where you were setting up all the rules and the world building, but it just, maybe because she is a debut author, it wasn't really fluid for me. And so like I'm trying to pay attention. And to your point, Laura, I did listen to the audiobook as well. And sometimes, when you listen to the audiobook, you get distracted, you miss a word here and there. Yeah. I'm like, oh, am I missing something? Would it be better if I read it? I probably would be better if I read it, but also I've listened to plenty of audiobooks where this has not been an issue.
Totally.
So it's not only the audiobook's fault, it's the writing as well. So like none of it was bad. There's a lot about it like I did enjoy. It's just it was like too much.
Yeah.
Which I don't think I'd ever would have pictured myself saying. But
no, I think that's definitely a good point because I only read the book. And so it felt I did have to go back at times and just reread what I had just read to make sure I was understanding because there were so many plot points, like you said. Like at one point, you are dropped into the story, first of all. Like you're kind of starting from a point where she is sort of retroactively telling you what happened before you've met up with the narrator. And the narrator is an unreliable narrator.
Absolutely.
She's processing trauma. She's processing her own crimes she's committed, her own learning of the society as she goes, because she was like born kind of part of the society. The people don't live in Uxley. And so children don't go there. And so she was raised outside of it and then removed from it for her and her sister's safety. And so like she's learning about the society, about this university and the culture, the language. Like there's so much to her own introduction that like we as readers, I think, are supposed to be confused and overwhelmed because the narrator is as well. So I wasn't as bothered by that necessarily. I did kind of look through TikTok just to see like, because I've seen a lot of good things about this book, but to see maybe what like reviewers were saying. And yeah, a lot of people had the same sort of commentary that Rico did of like, there was a lot going on in this book, overwhelming. I definitely think you could have split this book into two. Like, yeah. I think the mystery of her sister, the murders on campus could have been two different books.
Yes.
I think you could have like stopped it with her figuring out the murders. And then like book 2 would be like, wait, but I just at the end of figuring out the murders was like, wait, now I might have a lead on my sister. End of the book. Then book 2 picks up the mystery of like where her sister is and this, I'm forgetting the name of the group. There's so much in this, like, and I read this in the last few days, so I just feel like my brain has been shoved with info.
You mean
Nefries, the
Susenyos' court?
Yes, the Ethiopian royal court of vampires that Susenyos converted is what Laura's referring to for our listeners who have not read the book. That entire element is introduced in like the last 60%. So it doesn't feel like, oh, like we have plenty of time. This is a pretty long book, but it was just too much. I think that could have waited till book 2.
And it could have
a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, like in this whole book, there were little things peppered throughout leading up to figuring out about this group existing and what they're doing, and so that easily could have been peppered in among 1 or 2 books and leading up to it.
Agreed. I think that's like the major mystery overall. Is like, what is this group? How's it going to resolve itself? Because they're after Susenyos for like abandoning them in favor of like the university and its power and protection. So like, it's crazy. There's so much that goes on in this book. And I really like the world. I feel like I watched a movie. It was very descriptive, beautifully written. At times, I think there were times where it's awkward, but there are times where it feels more like prose than narrative. And it was beautiful and I loved it and I had fun with it, but I definitely would have altered certain elements of it. It felt like a couple of different books combined at times. And I think that's a debut author thing. It's like, oh, let's put everything in and just like see what sticks. And the editors were like, they all sound great. Someone like Rico has asked for this. Let's give it to him. And maybe sometimes we don't need exactly what we asked for. Give it to us in pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I might be dating myself slightly. I'm also gonna butcher the quote, but it reminds me of the show Friends. There's a episode where I think Rachel's trying to make a trifle, that was called.
Yes.
And she messes it up, and so he's eating it, and he's like, "What's not to like? Like strawberries good, cream good, beef good, like everything."
Joey. Yes.
Yeah, Joey. Yeah, all the things like individually are good, but they shouldn't go together. And that's kind of what though I felt like this book was like. It was like individually take some things out, and these would be great stories, and I would love to read every single one. But
much like a multi-course meal, you could have had the trifle and the shepherd's pie separately.
Yes, absolutely.
Course 1, course 2.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that analogy. I see what
Yeah.
Okay.
I know what you're putting down.
Thanks.
Yeah. For once, we have a shared reference point. Look at this.
Nice.
Bridging generational divides.
So rare.
Single-handedly through books. I know. We're really getting along this time, guys.
Oh.
Maybe it's a new chapter for us. What pun intended?
You're just trying to make up for how mean you were in our last episode.
Oh my God. They don't know that, Laura.
I cut it all out.
And I was nervous. So I just was like doing jokes to do jokes. And I was like, what did I just say? I blacked out. I truly don't remember what I said. None of it was real. None of it.
It's okay.
You guys have to understand when I make a joke, sometimes it's like, that would be funny. I don't mean it, but it would be a funny thing to say. And so I say it and then I just watch for the reaction and then I adjust. But there I did not. I just kept going. Because I was like, I don't know what to say next. So we're just going to let my brain dump on everybody. Anyways.
It's okay. That's all right.
Laura, what did you like, not like?
I mean, again, I just felt confused a lot of the time. I feel like I was not a big fan of our main character.
Not at all.
That was also very common on TikTok. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, this is a YA, and so there are times when, I mean, she is 19, so it's possible that it might be under YA. It might not. Either way, this character sounds like a child most of the time. And just the decisions that she makes and the thought process just annoyed me a lot. Mm-hmm. And she was constantly like back and forth, changing her mind about how she feels about things. And I mean, I understand to a certain point, like she is struggling with some experiences. She's struggling with accepting who she is.
Like, other than it being a school setting, these are some adult themes. And I understand that, like, in real life, there are people like younger kids, young adults who experience like this level, if not greater, of trauma. But I mean, I'm sure Emma Skies I just kept thinking of her the entire time because I know she's posted something about this where like adult readers love to read YA and then like are like enemies to lovers, like kids.
They want adult content in their YA. They want
adult content. And I'm like, this is a YA novel. Like, there's sexual tension. Again, yes, I'm aware that like kids and hormones stuff is happening. I was in high school once. I understand. But he is a vampire who's like hundreds of years old, was like 19 or 20 at the time he was turned. It's a little bit Twilighty for me, where like, it's like, is it ethical for like, yes, he's 17 on the outside, but on the inside is like 100+ years old. Is it ethical to be dating someone who's only lived 17 years of life or however, I can't remember how old she is, but definitely like young. So that felt a little gross that time.
So this goes back to the fact that I was listening to an audiobook and don't catch details. Did they have sex?
I thought they did.
Yeah, there's some interaction.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
There
if
was
it-
some there like I heard there was descriptions of movements, but I didn't know if there was like actual sex happening.
Rika?
I think, I'm pretty sure they slept together. I couldn't find the exact language in my ebook because I listened to it.
It was after
The Cassionite or whatever it's called.
wasn't it after he killed the one vampire? Titus. Yeah, and he was like, "Do you want to leave? Are you scared of me?" basically. And she was like, "No, I want to fuck."
Yeah.
Confusing.
Hey everyone, Editor Jason here, jumping in really quick to say that after our recording, we were still very unsure about the scene. So we did in fact go back and read it, and turns out they did not sleep together. At least not on the page. The language used was very intimate, but it seems like all that was described was some heavy grinding, which, can be fun too. But if anything more happened, it all happened behind closed doors. So for all of you who read the book and were just moments ago thinking about how wrong we were, you were right, our bad. All right, let's get back to it. To go back to your point, Laura, about Kidon being a frustrating character, I did find her to be super brash and insufferable. I know she's so focused on finding her sister, and I get we're supposed to like her as a character. I don't think the author's intention is for us to like her as a character. I think we're meant to kind of go through this process with her of kind of identifying that she's an anti-hero or maybe a monster in of itself. But I felt like she went too far to where I just couldn't root for her as a main character. Because she disliked all vampires because of the action of one, perhaps. And so her hatred of vampire kind came off very genocidal and very bigoted. And it's like, oh, you're just a horrible person.
Tell me you love vampires without telling me.
Listen, I got to protect my own kind,
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, there is one among us. Shit. My theories are correct. But yeah, I agree. I didn't love her. I loved the story. I liked the world we were in.
Yeah.
She was pretty annoying at times. I agree. I have nothing to add to that other than I think that was the point in the first 40-50% of the book, which is a long time to hate the main character. And I know that was a lot of people's complaints about why they DNF'd the book, basically, was that this character was insufferable to them. And I don't disagree. However, I feel like I've read books with worse characters that are more poorly written. And at least there was the nuance of trauma and her family basically, or not her foster mom basically brainwashing her whole life, only to find out that her family kind of trusted him, kind of didn't. So she was getting mixed messaging. So she was confused and sort of single-minded in that pursuit until she learned more.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I see what the author was trying to do, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. As do I. Like I said, I don't think we're meant to necessarily like her.
Yeah.
But I do think as our main character, we're supposed to
it's hard
root for her.
Yeah.
And it was hard to I really don't care. If you were gone from the story, I wouldn't mourn you.
What did you guys think of Susenyos though?
Hot. No complaints. No notes about how he was written. What? Hot.
I felt like he was consistent.
Hot. He was pretty, yeah, I don't complain.
Yeah, he was consistent. I'll agree with that.
He kept dropping some psychology bombs on Kidon all the time. And I backed up a few times and I was like, damn, man knows some psychology. Because
he's hundreds of years old. Shocker. He knows things and she doesn't. It's one of those things that I'm like, she ends up being wow, he knows me better than I know myself. And blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, just don't go there.
Yeah.
Let's not go there in the next couple books. And she kind of did a little bit towards the end of explaining their relationship, but it didn't feel as icky. But I don't know. It's weird when it's YA and now that I'm not 15. And Twilight, I'm sure, was the same to a lot of people my age when I was reading it.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know.
despite not really liking Kidon, how do we feel about the, I guess, enemies to lovers-ish thing?
It's my least favorite trope. It's my least favorite blank to blank trope. So right out the gate, this was an uphill battle for me to like care for. It can be done well, and I've read other stories where there's enemies to lovers, but I think where people who are a fan of this trope are going to love the fact that they fully hated each other and would have gladly killed each other if they had the opportunity. I think fans of that eat that kind of shit up. Whereas for me, I'm like, I know it seems performative because I know we're going to get to the lovers part.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, you guys are so cute. Just get there already. And so it's hard for me to enjoy the ride because I know the destination.
I almost read it more as like forced proximity rather than enemies to lovers.
Yeah.
Kind of.
When you set it up, enemies to lovers, and you're in a house like that and like you're kind of dependent on one another, I was like, it's forced proximity to me. Like like you said, it didn't ring true because I knew what was going to happen. So I was like, it's the opposite of hate, love. They're going to love each other.
Yeah.
Like no surprise there. So I don't know. I read it more as like forced proximity. Like over time, they started to like each other. And that's how I didn't hate myself for it.
Yeah. We've all, I feel like most people know like a couple or two people in our lives where they seem to dislike each other a little too much. And we're like, okay, you guys just clearly need to fuck. Like, you guys are interested in each other. That's what I felt with them. Is like, you guys hate each other a little too much to be believable. Just get there already. You're making everybody awkward. Just please release the tension. That's kind of how I felt with these.
Damn.
A little bit.
Release the tension. Okay. See, this is what I mean by like after dark ? Like my brain was very much like, what are we reading? I thought this was
It's not a YA, then maybe.
Yeah. I was like, well, I don't know. I was like, some of our after dark books could learn about the like sexual tension building.
Dark academia would be a great setting for some after dark books.
That's what I'm talking about, Rico.
There has to be some out there. I'm going to look.
Oh, there's definitely.
I mean, you got teachers, you got forbidden relationships among students, and
not teachers. No. Student-teacher relationships are not it.
In the real world, no. But in fantasy realms, as long as they're consenting adults. I'm talking college professor, not high school.
Yeah, agree to disagree on that one. Agree to disagree.
Yet you chose a cowboy book for next one.
Yeah. We haven't done cowboys yet, so.
I did not expect you to pick a cowboy book. I'm just putting it out there.
I like to keep you all on your toes.
Anyways, something that I thought was interesting, I think we probably all thought was interesting, was the vampire lore. Yeah. Obviously, the author did change a lot of things. What did you guys think of the differences that were done?
I enjoyed them. That was probably my favorite part of the book.
Yeah, best part.
Yeah, because, we've talked about how I like vampires, and I like when I read something new, but that feels still genuine and kind of feels like a new extension of lore. And so it was like, oh, yeah, you can bite, but what if you bite in different places? What does that mean? And
that was
there's,
cool.
like obviously there's the whole human versus vampire thing, and are they predators and prey, and how does that relationship work? But if you bind them and kind of keep them down, kind of like that lore as well. So there was a lot of things in this book that really did capture my attention when it came to the vampires. Enough to the fact, like, I want to look up how much of this was her creation, the author's creation, or how much of this was pulled from existing lore. Because I don't have that answer. I don't know if this is a thing, African vampires, if this is something they all know, or is this new to her? And I'd be really interested to find out.
That's a good point. Yeah, because every culture has their own vampire type lore. They may not call them vampires, but that's kind of what they end up coming down to. So it's very possible that maybe some of it is based on some of it, real lore in there.
Yeah.
Bella?
Yeah, I like especially the rules around blood and feeding, not just like where you bite is equal to like a different experience, but like the philosophy around how to become partnered with a vampire, like blood mated or whatever they call it.
Companion.
Your companion. Thank you. I like that lore of sort of like it's the like only the families can be the supply for the vampires. I also liked that the vampire population can't grow. They have to give a life for a life. So there will always be this number of vampires in their community. There were just some really good world building and rules that were very clearly laid out. And I also liked that they weren't always being followed. I was like, that's realistic, right? Where you have this, for every utopia, there is ultimately like a dystopian arc.
Mhm.
And this felt like while this was supposed to be like a vampire human utopia, there were dystopian problems where like vampires were feeding off humans, you know, outside of the parameters. They still had some rules around it. Like you couldn't feed on the same human. Like you had to wait 30 days before feeding off them again. And they like logged it. Like the vampires had like bureaucracy. It was
That's
adorable.
so funny.
I just thought like she really thought about that, the author. And I like chef's kiss. That's what like I really enjoy. And I think Rico's talked about it too. And Laura, I'm sure you feel this way as well. But world building, you have to have a clear vision. If I don't buy it, I don't want to read it. And that I think was its saving grace, was like the chef's kiss world building, that even if there were things missing, the suspended disbelief held because there were so many structures in place that like if there was a chink in the armor, I didn't see it. So it was great. Even like the silver being like lore, and Kidon mentions it like, oh, I carried around silver as a child thinking it would save me. Now I know it has to be imbued with their blood to become dangerous. And I was like, oh yes, like that's very like from a certain magical series, like there's, you know, lore around certain metals and certain poisons combining to kill other artifacts and blah blah blah. So yeah, it was really cool. I think there were a lot of details. The world building, I really have no notes. In the vampire lore in general also like was really well thought out. So yeah, that was really fun. I honestly could have read a whole book just about the rules and the history of this society and the different houses. Like I actually, for those who have not yet read the book, there are like these little snippets like in the chapters from a journal she gets from her aunt posthumously that contains like some of the history and lore of the families and like kind of what she's discovered in her own like detective work. And that was so fun to read. It was like, ooh, like the politics and everything, like these little, like if you're playing a video game, like the little, like, did you know, like the teaching you how to play the game. And I appreciated that. I think that was done really well too. So yeah, I liked the whole thing, vampire lore. Nope.
How did you both feel about the way, I don't know how to word this. So the sage, the last sage, created this bind or whatever that was supposed to essentially make vampires equal to humans. So that's why some of these restrictions or the way that things work is because of this bind, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. 3 binds.
Yes, 3 binds. How did that whole thing in general make you guys feel about that?
It was confusing at times. Maybe Rico's squinting. I don't know if he's thinking what.
No,
what do you think?
I like I said, some of the book was confusing and I found myself kind of checking out at times. And I think that's one of the things.
That was one of them.
Where it was just like, okay. Because I think they explained a little more as we go on to the book, but by that point, my interest in the book was waning. And I was kind of trying to finish the book.
Outing himself, damn.
To be honest,
but I don't disagree. I think I liked how it finished, and I liked how it started. The in between was very messy for that particular piece. So I like that in the end, it was like you have to basically become a vampire in essence. Like you know what it is to take a life, to like covet life, something like living life. I can't remember how they describe it. I was like, that makes sense. To like live as companions, you have to understand one another. And for humans, it's obviously the hardest because they've never been vampires, whereas vampires have been human. So I was like, that makes a lot of sense. But in between, the like figuring out the lore of these artifacts and figuring out the philosophy behind it, very confusing. Like I always say, I'm not science. Philosophy is even worse, I swear. Because it's a lot of, we're just thinking about something, and how could you think about it? And thinking about it is thinking. And you're like, what? Just what? So yeah, I agree with Rico. That was like the messiest part of the book. That was the least interesting. What do you think?
I got a little confused about some of the, I guess, logistics, some of the laws and like how they get around certain things or whatever. And so sometimes it felt the way that they are bound to what they can do, it felt weird because it essentially becomes that the vampires are kind of like in service to these families.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that made me feel a little uncomfortable in a way. I mean, obviously vampires are very dangerous, so they're like trying to make sure that they're quote unquote equal, but it also came off as vampires are only allowed to live if they are in service of these humans. So it kind of came off a little slavery-ish.
Yeah.
Unless I misunderstood, which again, I probably did on many things.
I think, well, this is the part of the book I was like trying to kind of mull over more and more. I don't think it came off as like a subservient relationship, but rather like symbiotic, like without one, the other cannot exist. Like the only reason that the humans have power over the other humans is because they have vampires that they are companions with, and they feel like deep bonds with one another. And their service is mutual, and it is supposed to be, but I think that is sort of the question we're supposed to ask is who's getting the better end of this deal? If vampires sort of are bound by these 3 rules that get them closer to being human, are they really on an even playing field still? Because even then, the vampires are much stronger. Like at any point, they could turn on the other families. If you had 100 vampires, they could turn on you if you were a house of 20. You don't have that power over them. They're not supposed to harm humans, but laws are only laws because we agree in the social construct to follow them. So they are somewhat bound by that magic and lore, but we obviously see them harming each other and like biting humans. So obviously those rules are sort of arbitrary to an extent. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I saw it as like subservient, but rather that's symbiotic nature. But maybe I misinterpreted it. I don't know. But it at any point, like she, especially with Kidan and Suseños, is that they have this like mutual respect. And she's like, I want to ask this of you. And he's like, well, I have something to ask of you. And like, I go into your soul. When I drink your blood, you see my soul and I see yours. So like, there's nothing to hold over one another.
Okay.
Necessarily. It's like mutually assured destruction. And like we see with, her friend who's like the first human to die at the hands of the secret society. Her vampire is like, I'll cut a bitch for talking bad about my human. Like she was very protective of her. So I think there is mutual respect. Is the society corrupt and broken? Yeah. But I don't know if their relationships are the problem, if that makes sense. I think it's ultimately like the thirst for power. I don't know. That's like, I like just finished reading this book. So I'm still processing everything that I read. There was so much in this book.
I think you're there. That's kind of my takeaway from it too, is that the relationship between the two, the humans and vampires, is supposed to be symbiotic. But the bigger question is, if you look at a lot of relationships like that, is it truly equal? And inevitably, no. So a lot of the types of relationships that we have in our real life like that, where two groups are supposed to be working together and supposed to be on even footing. Well, one kind of takes advantage of the other intentionally or not because of the system in place. Who knows? That's just the way it ends up happening. And so I think that is kind of the question that is being asked. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I think it's situational too.
Yeah.
I think that's also what you were getting to.
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
Like, depending on what you're talking about.
Yeah. And like to your point about like the relationship, like Kiran and Susenyos, like the way they interact, I showed you my soul, I saw yours, mutually assured destruction, like you said. I think it kind of goes back to the idea of like individual persons are cool, but people suck as a whole. And so like that. So yeah, the individual relationships are good and they are mutually beneficial. But when you start pulling out and lose those individual threads, the overarching system is flawed. And that's where the corruption and the subservience kind of comes in and why it starts feeling like the vampires are getting the short end of the stick.
Okay.
But like you said, Bella, I don't know. I'm still processing this shit too. So take everything you say with a grain of salt. I don't fucking know.
I wanted to point out, I just thought about this. They are not supposed to be called vampires in this book. They are called dranaics.
Yeah.
The term vampire is offensive.
Oopsies. You're right, my bad.
And the humans, the families, I believe, are called octi.
Octi. See, I just couldn't remember, honestly. I was like, there were so many terms. And that's on me for like, I did highlight things and was like, I'll refer to it while we talk. But we're just talking so fast. But yes, I agree. They are not the vampires we know, and so we shouldn't call them that.
It's just easier to remember the word vampire.
Yeah. Well, especially like we're talking to our listeners, like you haven't read it, so vampires, but they're not going to be called that. So that is important to note, that there is like, this is a whole society and culture outside of what we know. So
yeah.
And I'm curious, like, are there other
dranaics?
Dranaics, thank you. I already forgot. Are there other dranaics out there that exist outside of like the African culture that we're learning in this book? Like, kind of similar to when we read Book Eaters, it was like we were learning like a very like Georgian
it's very self-contained.
Yeah, like we heard of other societies that like Japanese book eaters and stuff like that, but are there other dranaics that exist outside? I don't think it matters for the story. Unlike Book Eaters, it was like mentioned and then like never brought up again, and we had issues with that. But this book, it didn't really matter, but that is the question I was kind of asking myself at the end, was like, ooh, I wonder, is there like, where have this like royal court of vampires been hiding? Are there other vampires out there?
I'm pretty sure there are, because there's 80 families.
Yeah.
And there's only 12 at Uxley.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So they're probably all over the world at
Where
this
in
point.
the world are the dranaics?
And but that makes me wonder, like, how like, what are the dynamics for them outside of Uxley? Because they also have their own politics happening inside this university. So what is it like outside? And that would also potentially explain too, why Kidan and June were constantly still scared of being found and having these dranaics find them and drink their blood, because they're still out there. They're not only in Uxley.
Yeah.
Reading this book made me realize that I'm kind of over the idea of humans and vampires being equal or coexisting. There's a lot of stories where, we're talking about this one, but there's other stories where they are equal, or I guess what I'm trying to say is I miss the days when vampires were the monsters and hunted humans. Like, Like those kind of stories, those kind of vampire stories are like what I enjoyed, right? Where the vampires are to be feared and you hide from them and they seduce you and they prey upon you. And
What about a story where humans are the monsters?
humans are the monsters in real life. I don't need that.
Similar to like Iron Widow, where, well, there's a spoiler, I guess. I don't know, but I'm going to try to say this without spoiling that book, even though it's been a few years. But like that book has you question who are the real monsters in the end.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been really interesting, especially coming from like the African diaspora perspective of this author of like, and like Black Panther has kind of done it, but like what would we be without like the conquering group? Like what if we didn't make compromises? And I'd be so curious how someone would interpret that for vampires. I know. Yeah. Monsters have always been othered in stories. They've always sort of represented underrepresented groups or groups that have been oppressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
In history. So I could see this going further and not including humans in a symbiotic way, but in a threatening way. And maybe they get eliminated. I'd be okay with that. I love the vampires too.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say, to make it clear, I'm not trying to say that humans are not the monsters, but I
know.
But like, yeah. I think of just this. Oh,
are you missing the horror side of it?
I'm missing the horror thing. Like, oh, humans and vampires, they coexist. We hold hands and skip down the street together. No. Like, I want one group to prey on the other in one shape or form. You know, like those are the kind of vampire stories that I've read that I really enjoy. You know, when I read a monster book, it's because of that, not. I mean, and every so often, it's kind of nice. We get, you know, the vampire academies and, you know, this, I guess.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, yeah.
But I just, it feels like it kind of cheapens what makes these monsters cool, in a sense, you know?
You're just, never mind. I'm not even going to say it. I feel like it's too inappropriate for even the podcast. Delete this, cut it out. Okay. But yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you that like I do miss the blood and horror. I just was saying, wouldn't it be fun if we just flipped it on its script though, that the humans were the monsters, not the vampires, that in that book that you're talking about? Because I would love to read that. I feel like I haven't. And if anyone has, please feel free to recommend it to me. But yeah, super. Yeah, I agree. I also was kind of like, oh man, why are they going to like try to take over and kill humans and shit? They're a little too nice. But it also was good to read that and have it be different than other vampire books. So I'm okay with that. I'm not a like horror monger like Rico is here, I guess. I don't know.
Wow.
What else we got? Anything?
No, I mean, I'm good. I feel like we've covered all my main points. I'm sure there are other things we could talk about, but
I mean, there was a lot in this book in
so
general,
much in this
but book. I think at this point we probably covered the main stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right, let's see. On Goodreads, this book has a 3.71 rating out of 12,500 plus ratings.
Wow.
So what would we rate this? And would you recommend it?
Ooh, see, the second question's harder. The first one, I'm going to give it 3 stars.
Say again?
I'm going to give this 3 stars.
3 stars.
I think the book was fine. I think it was great. It had moments of greatness in it, but it definitely had its issues. And so 3 for me is, this was a book I enjoyed just fine. I'm not really going to think about it much after this, probably. So to that end, though, would I recommend it to anybody? I don't know. I think if like someone really wanted to read like dark academia and vampires together, then like, okay, here you go. But I've read other books that do the dark academia better. Like this book is compared to Ninth House. I enjoyed Ninth House way more than this. In terms of like vampires, I've read a lot more. I've read a lot of books that I enjoyed more. So I don't know if I'd recommend it to anybody else. That sounds harsh. But I just, probably not.
Okay.
Wow.
Bella?
I think a 4-star, because I agree with Rico. I think as a book, a solid 3.5 probably, but I enjoyed it so much and I will recommend this to people. So solid 4. If it was better writing or just no, I think criticizing the writing's too harsh. If it was better story organization, had been split
A
into
little
2
simplified.
books.
Better
Yeah,
pacing.
I think it would have been a 5 for sure. I had a lot of fun reading it. So yeah, I'll definitely recommend it to people who enjoy vampires because Suseños was hot. All the vampires were hot. So if you like hot vampires and you like magical worlds and secret schools and things like that, this was a good book to me. Beggars can't be choosers. So I liked it.
Fair
That's
enough.
what I've been asking for. So
Laura?
I agree with Jason. I would give it a 3.
that's fine.
I feel like it could have been better in a number of different ways, but it wasn't terrible. Like, I didn't feel like I needed to or wanted to DNF it. I didn't have like serious complaints or anything. So I think a 3 is probably pretty good.
Yeah.
I do also agree with you, Jason, that I liked Ninth House way more. And so I'm wondering maybe if this was written for adults, maybe a slightly older main character who wasn't so childish, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I would have enjoyed it a little bit more if I liked the character. I don't know. I don't know that I would recommend it either, though.
Oh, interesting.
It's just one of those things I don't know that I could really pinpoint specifically why. I think just overall it's not really something that would stand out, I guess, in my mind to recommend to people.
Yeah.
So, which is good and bad, I guess, in its own ways.
It's a bummer for me. Like I said, I wanted to love this book so much. Like there was everything in it that I should have loved. And I feel disappointed. And I think that's why, like, I don't want to recommend it to anybody because I don't want anybody else's heart to be broken like mine, you know?
Aw. I honestly wondered if maybe just academia might not be my thing when I finished it. But then the things that you were saying why you didn't really like it just kind of reinforced how I felt. So I don't know. I don't think it's just that dark academia thing. I think it's just the way that it is.
I'll give you some recommendations and you can really test out if you like academia or not.
Okay. We'll talk.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's for me is like I haven't read a lot of dark academia, so if you have better ones, I will read it. But this is maybe like after Ninth House, like the 3rd book I've read that's dark academia, and I did like it better than Ninth House was just I read it so long ago, so I don't really remember the book. So I don't think that's a good sign that I liked it that much. But I've also had 2 concussions since then, so
Recency bias, you know.
That just means you need to reread it now.
It is. I never read the sequel, so that's also.
Oh, well, I don't know when the 3rd book is coming out. You could wait until the 3rd book comes out and then just read them all.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. So I don't forget it.
Okay, before we close up here, what is some of the shit we're reading next?
I mentioned before that I was reading some books for Black History Month. That's going to continue after this. Next up for me is The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djeli Clark. It's a stunning new world where a resurrected assassin sworn to unbreakable vows faces a mission that threatens to unravel her past in an ancient city full of gods. I really enjoy P. Djeli Clark, their series, The Dead Jinn universe, which is made up, I think, of a novel, 2 novellas, and a short story, is really, really good. I can't recommend that enough if anybody wants to get into, like, I don't even know how to explain it, kind of steampunky, kind of historical fiction in Egypt with, like, robots, not robots, but, like, I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot to it.
Steam engines and...
Yeah, in the way that there's a lot to this book that we read that didn't mesh, I feel like that meshes so nicely.
Okay.
All that to say is I'm looking forward to reading this novella. That's what I'm reading next. It is also the next book for A Seat at the Table's Sci-Fi and Fantasy Book Club. So that is another reason why I'm reading it. But yeah, that's next up for me. But also, Valentine's Day is around the corner. So I have to mention that I'm reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time by Jane Austen. I've never read it. I've watched the movie. The movie's great. But I figured it's time. And I'm going to use Valentine's Day as my excuse to read it. So we'll see how that goes.
Bella?
I'm still reading 2 books at once. So once those finish, I don't really have anything lined up. I do want to read the book I got Rico for Secret Santa. And
so I need to give that to you, yeah.
I think there's other book mail with arcs that I need to read. I just have not caught up to that, honestly. We've had a lot of books to read for the podcast. So I feel like my personal pile is pretty slim for TBRs.
Okay.
But yeah. What about you?
I am also going to be reading Dead Cat Tail Assassins. It's funny, I met Jason at A Seat at the Table Books not too long ago, and I bought that book just to buy it. And the woman at the counter was like, "Oh, by the way, this is our next book club book, so you should join us." And I was like, "What? This is perfect." So I immediately messaged Jason and was like, "I'm going to go to the next one." I've only been to one because it's hard to keep up.
Yeah.
I haven't been to any. It's hard to get to Elk Grove.
It is a little far. You got to plan ahead for it. Yeah. But I am excited to join the book club again. It was fun last time. So, but that is a novella, so I will probably get through that one quicker than normal. And so I'm going to also read Blood Over Brighthaven. Jason suggested it. I'm going to be honest. I don't know what it's about, but Jason said I need to read it. And so I have the audiobook, and I will probably be getting a physical or ebook as well, so I can switch back and forth. So I'm excited, even though I don't know what it's about. But you did tell me, you were like, this is really good. You need to read it.
It is really,
and I was like, okay, done.
Yeah, it's super highly rated on Goodreads. It's like 4 point something, really high.
Yeah. Oh, it is 4.43 out of over 30,000.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So it's super well written. Yeah. I'm excited for you to read it.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in for this episode. If you would like to let us know your thoughts on this book or any of our previous book discussions, you can find us on social media at Shit We've Read. And we're also on Discord. Would love for you to join. Our next episode is going to be our season finale, and it's going to be an After Dark episode. We would love for you guys to tune in for our discussion on Married to the Alien Cowboy. I don't know how I forgot the alien part. I only remembered the cowboy part.
How could you forget?
Me. That's by Ursa Dax. A quiet alien cowboy, a human woman on the run, and one very messy marriage of convenience. What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. What could possibly go wrong reading this book? It's going to be a great time. I'm super excited for it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting in a good way.
I have a good feeling about it.
Have you started it yet?
I've not started it yet. No, it's way too soon for me to start it. I want it to be fresh when we discuss it next month. Yes, this is my pick for After Dark.
Yes, Jason's pick.
Let's make that very clear. So
I hope it's your first 1-star review from the team.
You just want all of us to know what it feels like to pick a bad book.
Yeah, I do.
Well, it's not going to happen on this one.
So then maybe we'll stop talking about mine. Sure, Rico, you don't know that though. So
I don't know that. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see.
It'll be a good time regardless. So
there's a lot of red flags.
Yeah.
So already,
I don't know.
We'll see.
We'll see how it is. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you to you two, Jason and Bella, for joining me for this episode.
Yeah, of course.
And we will be back next month.
Bye.
See you guys. Bye.
Shit We've Read is hosted by Laura Benson, Jason Rico, and Bella Romero, with music by Joshua Chilton and editing by Jason Rico.
To join the discussion on this and all other books we've read, find us at Shit We've Read on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok.
For more information about us or to request transcripts, please visit shitwe'veread.com.
This podcast is part of the Bilo Network. Visit bilonetwork.com for more great geeky podcasts.
Thanks so much for listening.